as we start this conversation, I'm going to throw it to you in a second. I want our audience to remember one thing, though. When you're talking about recruiting, remember the recruiting golden rule, okay? It does not matter in the micro. It absolutely matters in the macro. What I mean about that, a single recruit, a 5-star, can go boomer buster at any time, right? You never quite know. Talent evaluation sucks. So, like, just because you get one guy doesn't mean anything. But when you look at class rankings and when you look at this chart, it's no surprise that all the best teams in the country are also the teams at the top of the chart, because in the macro, in the aggregate, it is a great indicator because, well, you're just more talented than the other team. So, bro, flash up the chart here. And this comes from 247 Sports, Bud Elliott. And Aaron, I want you to give me your, what jumps off the page when you see this image?
I just, where I'm going to go first is Georgia. I can't believe Georgia's at 77%. I thought they would be significantly higher, just the fact that the way Kirby is recruited over the past 5 years. I mean, it just seems like it's always 4 and 5-star guys, always a top 3 or 4 class, a couple of number one classes sprinkled in there. So I thought they would have been significantly higher than that. But the rest of the list doesn't.
77 is high, though. 77 is very high.
No, obviously it's high. It's the third highest, but like you're telling me there's the Alabama's recruited that much better. Like they have that many more blue chippers on their roster. I guess number-wise, I think that's another question too, is like I want to know with this whole thing is how many players are on Alabama's roster compared to Georgia's roster? Is there a difference that kind of throws the numbers off a little bit? Could they possibly be closer? Because it's hard for me to look at Georgia's roster right now and say that Alabama is 13% better when it comes to blue chippers in Georgia. Would you agree with that?
So I would say this. Brandon, the exotic barber, says, I think they should count transfers out of the program and in the program. So right before the season starts, they will revisit this and they will do that. Yep. But up to this point, they've already done that. Like the numbers you are seeing include all of the spring transfers. This is not looking at recruiting classes. This is looking at the roster as it stands currently. And we got to remember, Alabama just put together an even better class than the A&M one that we celebrated so hard, right? So they were already last year, and I've got last year's charts pulled up on mine. Alabama was already at 90% last year, and then they got a record-setting class. So, of course, they remained right there. Ohio State had a pretty nice jump. They were at 78%. They jumped up to 85%. But if you're a Georgia Bulldog fan, instead of getting upset, you should probably feel good because the Bulldogs ratio last year, 77%. Okay. Exactly. Kirby Smart has this thing steady as she goes. He is right down the line. No wobble, no transfers.
You need a couple humble you need a couple humble.
You do
2 and 3-star guys that kind of just like the Ladd McConkeys of the world. Those guys that show up to campus. I actually talked to Ladd the other day, and part of it was about kind of his untold story in the sense of his motivation. You see all these 4 and 5-star guys getting all the reps, and you kind of know that I got to maximize my few opportunities I get, whether it's in a game or in practice, to go out there and earn a starting job. So now you're going to get Ladd's best every single day of practice. You're going to get his best every single game, because in the back of his mind, the thought is they will replace me at any moment with a 5-star. So you need a couple of those, guys that are going to raise the level of work ethic because of that chip on their shoulder by being a 2 or 3-star. It's a good thing.
It certainly is interesting, right? Because I'm very tempted to be cynical here and be like, what are you talking about? You don't need Rudies. Give me the all-stars. But when you look, Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia, really, the big three are outliers on this list. Like nobody's even really close, especially Ohio State and Alabama. And yet what happened to Ohio State the last couple of years? Soft. They got bullied by Michigan because they weren't tough enough. What happened to Alabama? Yeah, they have all the talent in the world, but they seem to have lost some of that edge. What does Kirby Smart say about the Bulldogs? They're willing to eat off the fucking floor, okay? So right now, Smart has been able to maintain that edge, and maybe it is with a couple of kind of hand-picked Gruden grinders, if you will, versus just the pure superstars. That said, I always want more, right? I always want to be higher on this list because it just quite frankly gives me a better chance of winning. So,
anyone on that list that surprised you? Is there anyone on that list that when you saw, you're like, oh, I thought I thought they would have been on there for sure.
Well, I will say this: the 90% for Alabama jumps off the screen. That is
Yes.
absurd. There's no way that 9 of 10 players should be 4 or 5 stars. It's just unreal. The big three certainly jump off the screen. Bama, Ohio State, Georgia.
Yep.
Why are they top 3 every year? Look right here. Aaron,
Yep.
maybe in that 13% gap you're referencing between the Tide and the Dogs, maybe that's where some of the ESPN analytics earlier this year that you couldn't square with, maybe that's where some of that is
Yeah.
coming in
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
Also, kind of crazy how much shit we're talking about Bama when you look at a chart like this. So we'll
Yes.
see.
Yep.
But what jumps off the page to me, because I'm like basically a charter member of the college football haters ball. Hate, 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 hate. I'm looking at all the people that are just failing fucking mightily. Texas A&M, fourth on the list at 73%. And what did they go last year? What was their final record? Was it
Five and
5 and
seven.
7? Not even bowl
Mm-hmm.
eligible? I mean, are you kidding me? Had they not beaten LSU, would have finished tied for dead last in the SEC, and yet you have the fourth most talented team in the country. That is akin to a war crime. That is a college football war crime. It's just that Jimbo Fisher is so well protected in his gilded halls that you can't actually get to him. Texas and Oklahoma to be at 70% when there's not even another Big 12 team on the list. And to do what they did last year, which I believe finished 6, 7, 8, and 5, I want to say, that's pathetic. It's indefensible and inexcusable. This chart is why I'm so hard after Steve Sarkisian. And then, so to a lesser extent, kind of like the poor man's version of the Texas Oklahoma thing
Mm-hmm.
here, Florida and Miami being this high
Yep.
up and being as bad as they are. Another interstate rival, two very talented teams that were just absolute shit last year. So some of the teams, and then on the flip side of that, Aaron, like again, they're all underachieving. Then I look at Michigan, 54%, and yet beating the hell out of those 4 stars up there at Ohio State. And you're like, okay, you have to credit Jim Harbaugh and the culture that he's created at Michigan.
Yeah, you do. They've changed it around, and I will come to the defense of Miami and Florida a little bit, where I always use the phrase, and a lot of people do, like it's not about the X and O's, but the Jimmys and the Joes. Like you it goes to what you've talked about. You amass enough of these big time players, most likely you're going to win football games. If I just line up and I'm bigger, faster, stronger than you, I'm going to whip your ass. This is a mono versus mono. This is I line up as a receiver against a DB, offensive lineman versus a defensive lineman, linebacker versus a tight end. Who's going to win those individual matchups? You have enough of those guys on your team, you're probably going to win the game. But it also does come down to coaching just a smidgen. Okay. Like we joke
Yeah.
about the X's and O's and Jimmys and Joes. But like if you do have coaches that can figure out ways to put you in the situation to have success, moving a tight end around, putting a star receiver in the slot,
Yeah.
the training techniques, like all of that does go into account too. So my defense here to Florida, Miami, just a little bit here because they are more talented than what their record showed last year, is the fact that they are brand new coaches last year, maybe coaches that are unproven, especially Florida at the Power 5 level, a coach that you think is a big time fraud at Miami, who may not be a great coach. So before we start dousing the program or dousing the players of, you were overrated coming out of high school, let's also do the little bit of the nurture,
Okay.
mentality a
Okay.
little bit too of who are they being taken care of by, and not
So
saying, Ford's in a shithole right now, but first year head coach in the Power 5, I give him a little bit of grace.
Okay, so you're right. Okay, I obviously give Billy Napier more grace than Mario Cristofrod. Okay, because
Yes.
Billy Napier actually succeeded in his previous head coaching spots. Mario Cristofrod kind of has. I mean, I guess I'm going out of my way to kind of just like hand wave away his Oregon time, which is a
You
little
are, seriously.
intellectually dishonest, but he doesn't really do anything great though. He didn't do anything that every other Oregon coach hasn't done recently. Like if you go to
Mhm.
Oregon, you trip and fall into a 10-win season basically at this point. No, and I want to be clear, and I'm not coming at the players. I'm coming
Okay.
solely at the coaches. Like the players are what they are. The aggregate is what it is. This shows you that on average, Texas and Oklahoma are at least, because I don't know where the other Big 12 teams even rank. So we'll just say at least 20%
Yep.
more talented than their Big 12
Hmm.
opponents. and yet they're getting their ass kicked. That's inexcusable. Okay. Brent Venables, I'll give you a little bit of grace because it's year one as well. But Sark and Krista Fraud, Jimbo, no.